It is what it is. Are you doing any sort of intermittent fasting right now, Stephen?
A little bit, yeah. I do it more to get closer to my own divine self.
All right, that's great. Well, let's get started here. If you don't mind, I'm going to mute you, but I will pop you in and out because I want to have a conversation as much as I don't want it to just be a monologue. So let me get started here, and then we'll have some time to chat if that's okay with you.
Okay.
All right. Like we got somebody else who just joined. We'll give her a second to get in. Patty, good morning. We're just getting ready to get started here. All right, good. Well, let's get started. I'm glad everyone's here today. This is going to be good. I want to cut through the chase. I've been intermittent fasting for a long time, so I feel good about sharing this, and I'm excited to share my story, how and why I got so excited about this and want to share it with people. So let's get going here. So we're going to cover some things in this, certainly different kinds of intermittent fasting. There's many different kinds out there. There's certainly one I think that aligns best with our biology, and that's the one I'm going to recommend. Certainly, you know, who's it for? We're going to talk about that, you know, because it's not for everybody, right? It is for most people, but if you're really imbalanced, your health is really poor, it still can be for you with some caveats, which we'll cover as well. I definitely want to talk about how it works, because when we have a better understanding of how it works, then we're more likely to stick with it and understand the feelings that it may be giving us and the signals our body is sharing with us. Certainly, I've done this now with hundreds of people. There's a very easy way to get started on this. I know a lot of people kind of get a little worked up about intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding, and they don't know where to start, or they think, you know, it's going to hurt. But there's certainly a great, easy way to start. And then we will answer questions at the end. But I also want you to use the chat feature while we're going through here. If you have some questions that pop up, type them in here so we can make sure we get those addressed. All right, so let's get started. Who am I? That was me. No, this is me. I am traditionally trained chiropractor, 30 years this year. It's hard to believe. Trained in acupuncture as well. Had early training in functional medicine in the late 90s, very early 2000s, certainly before it was what it is today. And just getting to the root cause of things is something that is a powerful way to really, you know, heal people. And so that's what I loved so much about functional medicine, is it got to root cause and address things. I also have a master's degree in health administration, so I really understand healthcare, you know, from the clinical side, from the administration as the practice, running a practice, but also on the finance side with insurance companies and things of this nature. But we're not going to get into that. A lot of my time is spent working with a stem cell network around the country, so I have a lot of experience around stem cell rejuvenation, largely around orthopedic conditions. That's the specialty of the group that I work with. On the business side of that, I am not on the clinical side of that, but nonetheless, we're going to talk about this because stem cells and fasting go hand in hand. I've been doing fasting coaching for a couple of years now. I'm certified in the Prolon fasting mimicking diet. I've been to numerous fasting conferences, including the first international conference on fasting last year at USC, which was phenomenal to see what's going on around the world. and how it interplays in with all kinds of diseases, and is such a natural approach for us to get back to align our biology. I've had a holistic practice and holistic expertise in this 30 years. And, you know, you can't talk about fasting without eating. And so I'm grateful to say, you know, I've had some classical chef training, both French and Italian, and have been able to take a lot of that basic training and understanding and convert it into vegan, vegetarian, and kind of paleo type of cooking. So I'll share some of that throughout here as well. It's just as important to eat well as it is to fast. So let me start with my story. Who is this fat dude? That was me. 10 years ago, I went through a divorce. I went from about 190 to 235, gained a ton of weight, needless to say, as you can see there, and just got unhealthy, man. You know, I wasn't eating because I was hungry. I was eating because I was medicating pain and you know, depression and everything else that goes along with it, and put on 50 pounds. And as you can see there, I got fatty liver, diagnosed with fatty liver, and all that comes with that, the high triglycerides, the high cholesterol, the pre-diabetes. You know, I had seriously elevated cardiovascular risk factors, you know, C-reactive protein, we'll talk about that, very inflamed. The thing that really bugged me the most was the constant, unrelenting heartburn that I had all the time. And I was just eating too late. I was just as I said there, just a general mess. You know, I was having fun along the way. I was playing a lot of music. I was, you know, playing Frisbee golf. I was working less. But as you can see here, I was not taking care of myself, despite all of the background in functional medicine and holistic medicine. It wasn't stopping me from damaging myself. And so, you know, as I eventually got turned around, and that happened one night in the Safeway parking lot when I had to leave my house in the cold rain and go to Safeway to get Prilosec because the Tums wasn't doing it for the heartburn anymore. And I remember going into the store to get some Prilosec, and all of a sudden I was like, what am I doing here in the middle of the night getting heartburn medicine, taking it in my car because I couldn't wait to get home. And that was the night I woke up like, I got to turn this around. So, you know, pain, right? Pain sometimes is the motivator. And I tried a lot of different diets, right? I remember doing the 6 small meals, which really never made sense to me, knowing that our ancestors didn't have access to food for 6 small meals a day. So I tried it, didn't really work well for me. I tried paleo, but overdid it on the animal protein. I tried keto, but overdid it on the fat. I tried lots of exercise programs, some of which worked, you know, high intensity interval training. I tried P90X, that worked for a period of time. I tried Insanity. But at the end of the day, I realized that the exercise programs weren't really doing it. I had to do something a little different. And I had a friend who was doing a fasting documentary. It's out there now if you want to watch it. It's on Netflix. I believe it's free, called Fasting by Doug Orchard. And Doug started talking to me about, you know, intermittent fasting and water fasting and the fasting mimicking diet, and Jason Fung and Walter Longo, and mentioning terms like autophagy. And I was thinking, how do I not know about any of this stuff? And so I jumped in and started researching it, and it really made sense. And so, you know, over that period of time where I tried different diets and exercise programs, I lost about 25 pounds, but still had 25 pounds still on me. So I did a 5-day water fast, and surprisingly lost 12 pounds. It wasn't easy, but it worked, and I was really motivated to continue down this road, and just shifted my whole way of eating, looked into this prolonged fasting mimicking diet, did several of those and dropped another 12 pounds. And then through intermittent fasting and changing the way I ate, which I'll talk about throughout this, I was able to get back to my high school weight of 185 pounds. And so I'm still down at that weight, and the fatty liver's gone, the triglycerides are normal, my inflammatory markers, C-reactive protein went from 17 to below 1, which is where it's supposed to be. My hemoglobin A1C, which is a 90-day marker of blood sugar handling, was elevated, is now back in the normal range. And for the last 18 months, I've been able to keep this weight off with intermittent fasting. And as we know in studies of weight loss, that only 2 or 3, 4% of people keep the weight that they lost off for a year or more. And so I feel like this is a great tool for achieving weight loss and then maintaining it. But it's not just about weight loss, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes. So let's get moving on this. What is intermittent fasting? We'll get to that, Stephen, about Dr. Greger's work. Definitely want to talk about that. So intermittent fasting is, a way of aligning back with our biology. Historically, we've never eaten as much food as we do now. We've never had access to as much food as we have now. We've never had the ease of access to food like we do now. And so studies out of Scripps Institute in La Jolla show that we put something in our mouth about 21 times a day, and we eat for 15 hours or more a day on average. So because we have access to food and because it's so readily available and easy to get, we have moved away from our ancestral way of eating, the way our DNA is designed to handle nutrients and live, really. So and that's why we're seeing obesity and overweight. About 70% of Americans are in one of those categories. 1/3 of America is pre-diabetic. And it's because we just eat way too much, way too often, and have drifted away from this ancestral way of eating where our ancestors had access to food, maybe for a part of the day or only even a part of the week, and then they went without for a long time. And our body is designed to go without food. It knows how to burn fat, unless we've been eating too much. Now, you don't have to go back to caveman days to realize that we've drifted far. I have aunts and uncles in their 90s, and I talk to them about how they ate, even 50 years ago, and they had periods of feasting and famine as well, and so they did not have access to as much food as we do now. Also, they didn't have access to light, right? That's another thing, right? We can flip a switch and stay up until 11 or 12 o'clock at night eating, and if you've ever been camping, right, the light that gets dark fast, you're not really eating a whole lot late night, and generally you go to bed early. So part of our ancestral way of eating is not that far away from where we are today. It's only really about 50 years that this started to shift. So how does intermittent fasting work? Think of this as when to eat more as opposed to what to eat, all right? We'll talk about a little bit more of what to eat, but think of it as when to eat. So my whole philosophy around this is aligning our eating with our biology and with our circadian rhythm. So it's best really to eat during daylight hours. And that's when our body is working efficiently. That's when digestion is happening. That's when the pancreas is releasing insulin. That's when the digestive tract has motility in it, meaning able to move food through, is really between morning and about 5 or 6 o'clock at night. And so intermittent fasting works best during those hours, in my opinion, as far as when to eat. And then the fasting period during the time of our biology when digestion is not working, when motility is slowed down, and when the pancreas is not functioning. And that largely starts to kick in as the sun starts to go down. This is why I like to align intermittent fasting with the circadian rhythm and with our biology. So as we go for periods of time without food, insulin and glucose levels drop because there's no nutrients floating around in the blood. So that takes about 6 to 8 hours to burn up all the glucose that's floating around in the blood, and maybe another 3 or 4 hours to deplete the glucose or the stored glucose, the glycogen that's stored in the liver. And then we get into this fasting mode. So it has to do with reducing the glucose floating around in the blood, again, about 6 to 8 hours, and the stored glycogen in the liver, about a 12-hour fast for that to occur. And when that happens, then our body releases a hormone called glucagon that starts to mobilize fat for energy. Now, this is what gets us into ketosis, right? Ketosis occurs when our body starts to burn fat and release ketones as fuel, and which the brain can use, and that's how you get into ketosis. We don't get into ketosis by eating bacon and butter. So I think there's a lot of misconception about paleo and ketosis, thinking that you just got to eat tons of meat or fat to be this way, when really you don't. What you need, what gets us into ketosis, is having periods of fasting. So we're looking at a combination of glucose levels dropping, ketone levels increasing, and this becomes a hormonal issue because insulin and glucagon are hormones that are involved with this. It's not just simply a calorie in, calorie out mode of fasting. Let me tell you a quick story too about a patient or a coaching person that I worked with who got really great results with intermittent fasting. Andrea, slightly overweight female, pre-diabetic. When she came into the program, her blood glucose levels were 110, and she was pre-diabetic, eating a lot of hours during the day and late into the night. And so when we talked about this on our call, it all started with a strategy call. We talked about this. She told me about how she was eating, and I asked her if she'd be willing to start with an intermittent fast of 12 hours. And it really did scare her in that she didn't think she could fast for 12 hours. And a lot of people feel that way when we get started. But I gave her some parameters around that, and she was able to start with a 12-hour fast because she was sleeping for most of it, and immediately started to notice, well, the first thing she told me is she was sleeping better, right? When you go to bed on a full stomach, you just don't sleep well because remember we talked about that, the circadian rhythm slows down, digestion slows down, pancreas is not releasing insulin, and you got this bolus of food sitting in your stomach that's just sitting there, and all this glucose floating around in your blood because the pancreas isn't working. And so really, you know, we become diabetic at night when there's a lot of food in our stomach and we haven't digested it. And so that was happening to her. It was affecting her sleep. She was waking up numerous times during the night. And so when we started with this, immediately the very first thing she told me, and this was within a week, that she was sleeping well and not waking up numerous times during the night. So just shifting some of these hormones around a little bit, getting the glucose out of her blood at night and aligning again with the biology helped her to sleep better. It was a great story. So let's look at some of this. You know, the upsides that we know about with intermittent fasting are the ability to reduce inflammation because we're not putting food into our body as long. We're giving our digestive tract a break. And when we give our digestive tract a break, it cleans house. It just cleans itself up. We're also giving the pancreas a break from releasing constant amounts of insulin, which can help lower the risk of developing diabetes. And just as the reduction in insulin by not eating constantly can be beneficial, it also reduces inflammation and reduces cardiac complications. Again, I mentioned that C-reactive protein in my blood, which was 17 when I was overweight. It's supposed to be below 1. That's an inflammatory marker and a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So just eating less often can reduce some of these issues. Also, with the reduction in inflammation is improvement in joint pain, improvement in brain function. Brain fog clears up because inflammatory chemicals are toxic to the body, and they start to affect sensitive tissues like joints and brain function. Also, studies have shown that this can reduce excessive belly fat, and belly fat is a pretty good indicator of prediabetes. It's a good indicator of metabolic syndrome, which includes not only diabetes, but cardiovascular risks. So if you have a big belly, that is a sign of a risk factor for diseases of aging, diseases of middle age, and just, it's a early indicator. And a lot of people ask me, how do I know if I'm pre-diabetic? And let me tell you, on the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC website, they talk about that. If you're over 45, if you have a belly, if you had gestational diabetes, if you are African American, and if you don't exercise more than 3 times a week, you're likely pre-diabetic. But the one indicator I always tell people is just go in the bathroom, lift up your shirt, and look. If you have a belly, that's an indicator of some serious health problems that are, if not there right now, they're coming your way soon. So intermittent fasting can have a lot of upside to, again, to inflammation, to pre-diabetes or diabetes, to cardiovascular disease issues, and to get rid of that belly, which is a big indicator. Now, also, let me tell you about this belly with men, right? For men, fat releases estrogen, and so estrogen in a man is going to reduce testosterone levels or cause an imbalance, cause erectile dysfunction issues, potentially increase other cardiovascular risk issues, alter mood. And so this belly fat can be detrimental to men in many ways, but also, listen, for women, it can as well. As women get closer to menopause, their progesterone levels drop, as do their estrogen levels. But sometimes if there's belly fat or fat, the body's still releasing a lot of estrogen, and you can get all kinds of other health-related problems, PMS-related problems, cyclic acne, polycystic ovary syndrome, and difficulty with fertility. So the fat in women is detrimental in different ways, but equally as detrimental. Now, there is some downsides to fasting, and I think the main one that we need to talk about here is anyone with a history of an eating disorder. I'm very careful to work with people who may have had a history of an eating disorder. This may exacerbate it in some people, and it's not for everyone in this respect. Also, if you have a body mass index, a BMI below 18, that's just a little too thin to go intermittent fasting, because remember, we talked about this, the insulin and glucagon hormone balance. If you don't have much fat to burn for fuel during that fasting period, the body will turn to protein, muscle, and start to consume muscle, which is not what we want to do here. We want to burn fat. So it's important, again, if you have a history of an eating disorder, if you have a BMI below 18, also if you have unstable blood sugar. I've worked with a lot of people on this program. We haven't seen instability in the blood sugar too much because of the way we start intermittent fasting is a slow crawl, walk, run type of mentality, but it's something to keep an eye out for. Also, if you're on blood pressure medications, sometimes blood pressure can drop as it normalizes and the medication now becomes too strong. So that's something to keep an eye on. Also, some people who may be on diabetes medications like metformin or gliberize may need to work with a physician who can monitor that and make sure their blood sugar doesn't go too low to the point that they could potentially faint. Also, a history of fainting. So while this is the majority of people, and this is really baked into our DNA, some people have gotten their bodies so imbalanced that it can't recover well, or the medications that they need to be on, because again, they're so imbalanced, prevent this from occurring. So I really recommend, if you're in those camps, to work with somebody who's got a background in dealing with fasting and intermittent fasting, and maybe even avoid it if you have a history of eating disorder or BMI below 18. So one of the best places to start is with a 16-8 intermittent fast. Now, we're going to talk about this. You don't just go straight to 16 hours of fasting. We do a crawl, walk, run version of getting there, and we start with a 12-hour fast. I'm going to get to another slide of where to start and how to start, but I think this is probably one of the best forms of intermittent fasting. It's 16 hours of fasting, 8 hours of eating, so you're reducing the eating window. And if you think about it, really, our ancestors most likely ate this way. I'm not talking about caveman. I'm talking about my aunts and uncles who are in their 90s. They didn't eat all day long. So this is probably one of the most well-known forms of fasting, and we can get to 18 hours by starting at 12. Now, there's a couple different kinds of 16-8 that are really documented in the literature, and I call it early intermittent fasting or late intermittent fasting. Early intermittent fasting means you likely skip breakfast, right? And skipping breakfast, starting your day of eating maybe at 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock and going until 6 o'clock at night. So that is one form of fasting. And then there's the late intermittent fasting, meaning being done eating by 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon and starting your daily 16-hour fast really early and not eating dinner and going all the way until breakfast, 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock. So there's two ways to do this, and everybody's different. You have to figure out what is best for you. Now, everyone's talked about breakfast being the best meal of the day, the most important meal of the day, and there are some studies that say that skipping breakfast can, these are correlation studies. Let me put it that way. They're not causation. Correlation means, when we see one thing happen, we think that correlates to what we see as the result. That's a correlation versus causation, meaning when we skip breakfast, we know it caused this problem. We don't have that data. We have correlation data. So in numerous studies on skipping breakfast, it shows an increase in gallbladder disorder. It can show an increase in cardiovascular atherosclerosis. In a big study in Japan, 32,000 people, it showed an increase in all-cause mortality, meaning you could die. So some people think, in the fasting camps that we should not skip breakfast. On the flip side, we see that this late time-restricted intermittent fasting being done early in the day balances hormones better, helps with reactive oxygen species, which means free radicals and oxidation of the cells, and so they're eating breakfast. So I think the verdict's still out on skipping breakfast, but I think we have to pay attention to that and see how the body responds to either not eating breakfast or not eating dinner, and everybody is a little bit different here. So, but here's the bottom line for fasting. I think being done 3 hours before you go to sleep is the best. Again, we mentioned we want to align fasting with the circadian rhythm, and so as we know by the circadian rhythm, digestion slows down or comes to a complete stop after the sun goes down. Same with the pancreas releasing insulin. And so it's going to affect your circadian rhythm. And if you eat late and go to bed with food in your belly. So my recommendation, regardless of how you do this, is to be done eating 2 or 3 hours before bed. One, it'll help you sleep better, as with my patient Andrea. And two, it will not let you become diabetic at night, because that really is what happens when we're not digesting at night. It's not as benign as we think. And Sash and Panda, again from the Salk Institute in California, points to about 140 diseases related to circadian rhythm disruption. And the two main ways we disrupt the circadian rhythm is by eating late and having a lot of light in our face as the sun goes down and we have more and more artificial light keeping us awake at night. And when there's circadian rhythm disruption, we don't sleep as well. And we don't sleep as well, growth hormone is not released. In men, testosterone is not released as well. We know when sleep disruption occurs that it decreases testosterone in men. It increases the risk for cardiovascular disease. And circadian rhythm disruption has been classified by the World Health Organization as a carcinogen. It can cause that much damage to the body. So my recommendation, no matter which direction you go with intermittent fasting, is to align it with your circadian rhythm. Don't eat late. Be done eating before bed. So what's important is when you're doing these kinds of fasts, no matter what kind it is, and we're going to get into a couple others, what you eat is really, really important, because you want to eat a nutrient-dense meal. You want nutrients in those 8 hours that you're eating. You don't want to just fill up with a bunch of crap. And so the recommendations, that I recommend are nutrient-dense meals, whole food, plant-based, as much vegetarian or vegan as you can possibly go. And I recommend, because I'm taking people who are new to this, I still allow people to eat about 20% of their meals as animal protein. Now, Stephen, you mentioned Dr. Greger here, who's very vegan, and his book, How Not to Die, and he is someone I follow, is a no animal, no dairy, no salt, no oil kind of guy. But when I mean, it sounds like you've been working with patients a long time too. When you tell people to take all that out of their diet, they end up not doing anything. So I start out lenient and recommend an 80-20 diet. So what is 80-20? 80% whole food plant-based, 20% animal protein, and in 21 meals a week, that's only 4 meals of animal protein. So you're still largely going vegetarian and or vegan on this. I think it's an important place to start, 80-20. Now, but let me tell you about a story about Shelley. She was in a program with me. We started out on a call, strategy call, and she wanted to lose some weight. And her husband, who actually didn't get in the program but watched from the sidelines, she lost 20 pounds in 12 weeks doing the program with me. Her husband, who watched from the sidelines, lost 50 pounds, which is absolutely amazing. And that was in 12 weeks. And so we all carry a lot of excess weight, but to lose 50 pounds, he had a lot of fat build up there. So now they're vegans. They just reached out to me. They're vegan now. And so while we start people out in an 80-20, it aligned with them to go vegan. And so they have maintained this weight loss. They're super healthy. They look great. But it all started with this original strategy call, starting to talk to them about what we were doing and how we got people moved along the pathway. and they did do 80-20, but found that vegan worked better for them. So it's important when you're eating to make sure you eat healthy foods while you're eating so that you are really nourishing the body. Also, when it comes to what to eat, there's also important about eating within a 1 hour window and being done. So that's important. We don't want to string on eating all day long and not give our body any breaks, and keeping insulin and glucose levels artificially elevated all day long. What we want to do is eat within a 1 hour window and then stop with no snacking and not drinking caloric foods, because that defeats the whole purpose. Eat within a 1 hour window, stop, no snacking, and then just drink water or black coffee or tea, but without sugar or sweeteners in it. Even artificial sweeteners trick the body into thinking there's glucose coming in. And the two things that trigger altering a fast or the benefits of fasting are glucose and, to a large extent, protein, to more of a specific extent, animal protein. So those are my recommendations on, what you can eat: whole food, plant-based, unprocessed, unrefined foods. Now, it's important to know that you cannot eat a bunch of crap during the 16-8 window. It's not suited for, fast food or fried food or refined food or things of this nature. Even processed meats, hot dogs, bologna, salami, sausage, these things are very detrimental to the body. And again, World Health Organization has classified processed meats as a carcinogen. So we want to try to avoid that kind of stuff during our eating pattern, whether it's 12 hours or 8 hours. We're going to get to that here in a second. There's other types of fasting diets. The 5-2 diet, popular with some people, involves fasting for 2 days a week. Now, I do maybe 1 day a week of fasting every other week. I don't really advise this type of diet, fasting 5-2, where you eat for 5 days a week and fast for 2. You could fast on a Tuesday and Thursday. If you've been doing this a long time, your body's probably suited for handling this. If you're diabetic, this is probably a great way to put diabetes in remission. But I would recommend working with somebody if you're going to do this. It's not always an easy thing to do. It's not a starting point at all for anybody. Some people do 5 days of regular eating and some calorie restriction on those 2 days, but it's not something that I'm recommending. I just want to share some of these other fasting ideas. There are some versions of every other day diet or every other day diets, that alternate day fasting, where you eat a regular meal and then on the alternate day you eat a 500 calorie diet. And that has shown benefits at reducing inflammation, weight loss, belly fat, things of this nature. But you really, if you're going to do this, want to keep it under 500 calories. I'm not a fan of this because you got to now start measuring and paying attention to how many calories you're eating. I like intermittent fasting, 12-12, starting there, or 16-8, because you don't need to measure and count and think about this to a large extent. So this is another popular one. Well, I shouldn't say popular. It's another type of fasting that's available, but not my favorite. There's the warrior diet, also known as the end of day diet, where the Spartans, the Romans, wouldn't eat all day long and then they'd feast at night. And I know some people who do this very successfully. It's a 1 meal a day type diet. Again, not for everybody. And you got to be careful that you're not losing too much weight doing these kinds of things. The downside of this for me is, you got a big belly full of food, probably too close to bedtime. I think it's too much food too late in the day. Again, as we talked about, the circadian rhythm is slowing down in the afternoon and evening with gastric motility not working real well, and with the pancreas not releasing a lot of insulin. So again, I'm not a big fan. I do know people that do this. It's popular among the paleo crowd to some extent. But yeah, Stephen, we're going to talk about 12-12 here in a minute. But again, not my favorite, not a place for most people. So how do you get started? You know, look, it's important to realize that we don't always eat because we're hungry, right? I got fat because I was depressed and going through a tough part of my life. So I think it's important for us to get our head wrapped around why we want to do this and what you can expect. We're not going to get immediate results out of this. You're going to feel hungry. You're not going to get immediate results like planting a seed in the ground. We don't always see, right? You don't see the sprout for a few days to a couple weeks before it pops up, and then it shows up. And the same with dieting or changing how we eat. So we need to go into this with a plan, and I'm going to give that to you here. Also, look, if you're not healthy or you're on medications, you might need to get medical advice, right? I don't recommend this at all if you're pregnant or breastfeeding. I was just getting ready to start a program with a woman who was a little overweight, having difficulty getting pregnant. We're going to reverse a lot of this doing the intermittent fasting. And then she did get pregnant. I was like, okay, we're not doing this, not even a little bit. Now is not the time for the body to think it's not getting enough nutrients as you're developing a new baby. I wouldn't recommend this, as I mentioned, to anyone with an eating disorder, or if you have diabetes or blood sugar issues. Now, thing is with diabetes, this can put diabetes into remission, but you got to work with somebody who can help you. And if you're prone to fainting or other issues. So also, we got to ditch the diet mentality, right? This is not a diet. That's what I love so much about this. Again, it's not what to eat, it's when to eat. And when you're eating an 80-20 whole food plant-based diet and you're eating healthy, then this is not a diet. We're restricting the amount of time calories are coming in, and we're giving our body an opportunity to balance the hormones, insulin and glucose, and to start to go after fat and burn fat. Simultaneously, we'll be making insulin more sensitive. We will be resting the pancreas. We'll be resting the digestive tract. We'll be reducing inflammation. And so we want to ditch that mentality. I'm not saying you can eat anything. I want you to eat healthy, but we don't need to measure macronutrients. We don't need to measure ounces. We don't need to measure any of this. And we just need to get back to trusting our body and listening to our body and knowing how it's feeling, and then acting accordingly. So we're going to get rid of this whole diet mentality. I want to mention this real quickly, disease prevention. Look, when I was at that international conference on fasting, it is phenomenal. Some calorie restriction, we know, extends life, but chronic calorie restriction slows down metabolism. So when you're intermittent fasting for 12 to 16 hours, you're still eating. So the body's not slowing its metabolism down. If you just reduce your daily caloric intake by 500 calories, your metabolism is going to slow down and you're not going to lose any weight. You're not going to become healthy. We know, again, at that international conference on fasting, we saw all kinds of studies on disease prevention. So you may have heard the term autophagy. That's where the body consumes weak, dead, dying, old, senescent cells. It will consume those for fuel, and the body knows that these cells are not helpful. They're usually putting out chemicals that are toxic and not beneficial. Now, in order to get into autophagy, you need to be fasting for 48 hours. Despite what you might hear out there, autophagy does not happen in 18 hours of fasting. It takes about 48 hours. The other upside of longer-term fasting is stem cell release, and that takes place after about 3 to 4 or 5 days of fasting, which we can achieve, and I do when I coach with people using the fasting mimicking diet. The body knows it's consumed those weak, old, dead, dying cells, and it now knows that it needs to replace those. And so there's this stem cell release. After 48 hours with the autophagy, the body cleans up those cells. It cleans up even old white blood cells, which is what they're finding helps autoimmune conditions now. And speaking of which, let me tell you a story about Tammy, who came into a program with me after a call, who had ulcerative colitis. And after 12 weeks of this and 3 prolonged fasting mimicking diets and daily intermittent fasting, she was able to reduce her medication use in half. And her doctor said she didn't need to come and see her, but now twice a year instead of quarterly. So interesting on how this can help with all kinds of conditions. And a lot of studies are being looked at now with autoimmune conditions, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, irritable bowel syndrome. But let me tell you about cancer and chemotherapy. Now, I'm not a cancer specialist. I don't treat cancer. I don't treat people with cancer, but I did enjoy seeing these studies. And these are out of USC in California and a couple out of universities in Italy. When they have people go into who have cancer, even stage 4, go into chemotherapy in a fasted mode, the chemotherapy works better. Why? Well, the body knows when it's fasting. Healthy cells are able to handle a fast. They put up a shield to stress, and they become actually stronger. The weak cells, the cancer cells specifically, have no sugar to live on, because that's what cancer cells live on, and they become even weaker, and they cannot put up that shield to protect themselves. And so when they go into chemo after a 3-day fast, 1, they don't get as sick, and 2, the chemo works more effectively. It was phenomenal, the results. And the downside, the vomiting, the inflammation that occurs with chemotherapy was significantly reduced. So fasting, longer term fasting, not intermittent fasting, but longer term fasting can be very healing and preventive, with autoimmune conditions and with chemotherapy. Let me tell you too that reducing insulin resistance can lower the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And even on the website, the American Cancer, which one was it? One of the federal government websites has on there prolonging the length of nightly fasting. That's what we're talking about. Intermittent fasting is a non-pharmacological strategy for reducing the risk of breast cancer recurrence. Improvements in blood sugar and sleep may be mechanisms for linking nightly fasting with breast cancer prognosis. So interesting. National Cancer Institute, that's where this came from, shows benefit. As we mentioned earlier, heart health, the inflammatory markers, mine went down significantly, and so big benefit. Same with brain health. When we're burning ketones and not sugar, that's very helpful with the brain. And a substance called wait a second, what's it called? BDNF. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor gets released and stimulated with ketones. And so while we're fasting, the brain can actually become healthier from this. And when it's not constantly bombarded with insulin and glucose, inflammatory levels in the brain and body reduce, and that's just a good thing all the way around. As I mentioned, my C-reactive protein, my inflammatory marker for cardiovascular disease, this was when I was 10 years younger, was 17. Even 5 years ago, was still 17 and 18. And then with fasting, went below 1. And I just had my physical last month, and it is still below 1, I'm glad to say. So important. Some people talk about intermittent fasting not working well in women. As men, again, it comes down to working with somebody who knows how to do this. There are hacks, I hate that word, but there are ways to make it work just as well with women and men. And I can't say I totally agree with this statement. As I mentioned, Shelly and Andrea in my last program did really, really well, sustained that, and have continued to do well. It seems to work really good in men. But see this juice here? I'm not a fan of people drinking juice at all. It's just a major spike of blood glucose for no good reason. It's important to consider your goals when we're going into this. Most people want to lose weight. This is a great place to start with weight loss. Don't eat less often. Sensitize the insulin, reduce the glucose, reduce the inflammation, and you're going to automatically start to burn fat as we balance out these hormones. It's important to know what your goals are when going into this. And make sure that, you know, you've chosen good goals and you're motivated, because when you get hungry, it's easy to cheat, because we don't eat because we're hungry all the time. We eat because we're bored. We eat because we're depressed. We eat because we're anxious. We eat because we're angry. And so when you go into it with a goal, it's good. And listen, there's a spiritual aspect to fasting as well. Every major religion in the world fasts for mental and spiritual clarity. So there's a lot that can come out of fasting that can be very, very beneficial. Now, Stephen, to answer your question, what is 12-12? This is where I start people. Not everyone is ready to go into a 16-8 fast. Not everyone has even heard of intermittent fasting. So I recommend people start with a 12-hour fast. And Andrea, when I told her this, her eyes popped out of her head because she didn't think she could do it. And I said, we're going to do it while you're sleeping. Excuse me, getting a little dry here. So we started her with being done eating at night at 7 o'clock at night, and she couldn't eat again until 7 o'clock in the morning. Now, she did freak out a little bit about this because she liked snacking at night. Well, this was part of her overweight. This was part of her pre-diabetic blood sugar. And so, you know, as I pointed that out to her, her why and the reason she wanted to do this had changed. She was in her early 50s and didn't want diabetes. They were now empty nesters. She was going to be a grandmother. She wanted to have her health. She wanted to be able to spend time with her grandchildren. And so 12-12 actually became easy for her. So if you've not fasted before, if you don't intermittent fast, and this is a little daunting for you, I would recommend starting at 12 hours. Be done eating at 7 o'clock at night, and don't eat until 7 o'clock in the morning. And as your body gets used to burning fat, and it will in about a week, maybe two, some people it takes a month to get fully into ketosis, you will be ready to add another hour and go to 13 hours of fasting. And then as the next week rolls around and your body gets more adapted to burning fat, you can go to 14 hours a week, and so on and so forth. But you just need to listen to your body. My sweet spot is somewhere between 15 and 16 hours a day. So sometimes it's only 14. On the weekends when I'm home with my family, it's a little bit less. The thing is, the studies all show that the longer you do intermittent fasting, the better the results are. So 12-12 is a good starting point, but ideally you want to get to a little bit longer of time, 16 if you can. But listen to your body. Again, you'll be sleeping for a lot of this. The late intermittent fasting showed a real good increase in weight loss when you were done eating about 4 o'clock and didn't eat until, and actually in that study, I think people were done eating at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and didn't eat until 8 in the morning. So if you want to go real deep for weight loss, I really recommend doing it, starting your fast earlier in the day. It's a little hard if you have a family. I do want to tell you about one resource that I really, really like that helps align your why and when and all this with eating, and it's called the Zero app, Z-E-R-O. It's free. You can download it on the Apple Store, and it's a fasting application, and you can track. It'll set reminders. You can track when you're going to start your fast. You can track when you're going to stop it, and you just hit the button and it starts tracking the time for you. For me, it's a bit of a game in that once I start that timer, I'm done. I'm not eating again until it's time for me. So right now, I'm still fasting from last night, burning fat, got plenty of ketones going to the brain. I'm not forgetting things. I've got lots of good energy. And that's what you can expect as well once you start intermittent fasting, is to get into this regime of burning fat. So I would recommend starting with 12 hours if this is new to you, adding a little bit every week. In between those fasting windows, make sure that you're eating super healthy, whole food, plant-based diet. 20% of your meals from animal protein, not 20% of your calories, 20% of your meals. And then as you can, wind back down to even less. And that's whole food, plant-based. Those are beans and lentils. Those are vegetables and low sugar fruits like berries. Those are raw seeds and nuts, unsalted, unroasted. And look, if you're really overweight, that might also include low carbohydrate, below 50 grams a day. And that's a whole other twist to intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting fits well with a paleo diet or a keto diet or a whole food plant-based diet. It's just, again, restricting the window of time that you're eating. So I want to open this up to questions, and I'll unmute everybody. And I would love to hear any questions that you have that I could answer that didn't get answered here.
Can you speak a little bit more about that 4-day regimen?
The prolonged fasting mimicking diet?
Yeah. You said something about great results with 4 days of not eating or something like that.
Okay, sure. Well, after about 48 hours, so you got to go 2 days at minimum for autophagy to start, and the body will clean house for about day 3 and 4, and that's a great way to clean up all the old dead, dying, senescent cells. But on about day 4 is when our body also starts to release stem cells, and mesenchymal stem cells and hemopoietic stem cells. So the body will release these out of the bone marrow. The body will start to rebuild itself because it knows it's cleaned up all those old cells and needs to replace them. And that's a great way to get new lymphocytes, white cells. So if you have an autoimmune condition, you're going to clear up a lot of that old crap and then release new white blood cells that are not sensitized to that autoimmune condition. Now, fasting 4 days really isn't for everyone. I did 5 days last year. It's hard. It takes away a lot of social. You get cold. You sleep like crap. And
you get what? But
if you go 4 days or 5 days, you get a big upside to it. I'm certified in the prolonged fasting mimicking diet. When I coach people to go 4 or 5 days, that's the one we go to. That's a program that starts out on day 1 with 1,100 calories, and then the remainder of 4 days the remainder of those 5 days go down to a 600 calorie diet, and the body thinks it's in a fasted mode. There's nutrient sensing pathways in the body that don't get triggered by the composition of the food in this program, which is 100% plant-based, and the body does not think it's eating. There's a certain threshold with these nutrient sensing pathways that get triggered with animal protein and with glucose. And so once those pathways get triggered, growth hormone and mTOR and a series of chemicals start to occur that lead to growth. And in children, that's fine. And in adults, it's not, because when growth occurs, it's fat and it's tumors and it's cancer. And so, and it's inflammation. And so controlling for that, that's why I go more whole food plant-based, knowing that these growth pathways get triggered with animal protein and glucose. So it's about 5 days of of the fasting mimicking diet. I've done about 4 cycles of that, and you can tell you feel better. If you're older and you got aches and pains, it's amazing how the stem cells relieve some of that. And it's amazing what I see in people that I coach in their face. And
so you're saying like 4 days of just a water fast can do amazing things.
It can do amazing things, yeah. But again, it's hard and it's not for everybody. But if you can do it,
I'd like to do it. I know how difficult it would be just to go 4 days, because I am going to the desert, high desert, in a few days.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking I should do 4 days of a water fast.
Hey, if you are fat adapted now and your body knows how to burn fat and you've been intermittent fasting, it'll be easy.
Oh, I'm not. I eat late.
Then it'll hurt. That 4 days will hurt. If you
hurt in what way?
You're gonna be hungry. You're gonna feel miserable. You're gonna be looking for food constantly. You're gonna get cold. Well, you're gonna get cold anyway. But hey, if you could, when I do these things, I get really fat adapted for a few weeks in advance and do longer intermittent fasts, so my body's used to burning fat.
Gotcha.
If it's not used to burning fat and you run out of glucose in 6 hours, it's going to freak out and you're going to feel miserable.
Yeah, but it won't be unhealthy.
Probably not. If you're already not on medications and you're pretty healthy otherwise, it's not unhealthy. No.
Just miserable.
Just miserable.
Okay.
Pick your poison.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if you're going to be at the high desert and you're coming from sea level, make sure you're drinking tons of water, because you're going to already be a little easily dehydrated at a high desert altitude of dryness. Living here in Colorado, that's the first thing I tell everyone. I'm also open for any other questions, and I want to, while we're talking here, look, if you want to do a strategy call, I'm glad to get on a 30-minute call with you and kind of assess your situation and help you pick a good place to get started. This is my calendar link at Calendly. I'll give you 30 minutes. We can do a strategy. All those examples of people that I mentioned in my last program, we all started at this level of just figuring out, what's good on a strategy call and deciding, if they were appropriate candidates to go to the next level. And so that's a great, take it. It's free. It's 30 minutes. I'm not going to sell you anything. We'll get you the best place to start on this. And would love to share more nuanced about this. Lastly, I'll leave you with this. I have a 12-week program, an intermittent fast. It's where we talk about when to eat, the main pillars: when to eat, what to eat, how to eat, and when to exercise. We go deep into all of those and really get more and more nuanced. We guide people through intermittent fasting all the way up to their first 24-hour water fast. We do 3 prolonged fasting mimicking diets during that 12 weeks. So 1 week a month, we do a 5-day fast. As we get towards that 3rd month, we're doing one 48-hour water-only fast. And in that process, we're teaching people, about whole food plant-based diets. We're sharing a lot of recipes. We're looking at toxins, how to get toxins out of your body that get mobilized with fasting, because you got to get them out, because they're going to get released from fat storage, which is where most toxins are stored. We talk a lot about the microbiome and gut health and how to get that healthy. The cool thing about intermittent fasting that the research shows, and I'll be honest, this is in mice. A lot of the research has been done in rodents, shows an improvement of the gut microbiome. So the flora in the gut gets healthier, and leaky gut symptoms improve. So just not stimulating the digestive tract as much has been shown to stimulate gut microbiome health, leaky gut problems, and so we cover a lot of that. And the purpose of my programs are to teach people to be their own doctor. That's the hashtag I use. A lot of this stuff is, you know, a doctor doesn't get you healthy. A doctor runs tests, gives you a diagnosis, and wants to give you pills. The goal of what I teach is to be your own doctor. You know when to access your physician, know when you need to go see someone, but really know how to be healthy. What should you be eating? How should you be eating? How should you be sleeping? What kind of exercises are best? And then how do you get toxins out of your body? There's so much of it floating around that we are susceptible to, that it's probably one of the biggest health crises in the world right now. And that affects all of our cells, our metabolism, how we digest, how we absorb, how we burn fat, how hormones function is all affected by toxins. So I appreciate all your time.
Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, Patty, please do.
Hey, do you have any thoughts on drinking lemon water and what those thoughts are? And also, is lemon water breaking your fast during the fasting period?
Those are great questions. So again, I mentioned glucose, right? Is the chemical that breaks the fast, glucose and protein. So I think if you do half a lemon, the glucose level is going to be super low and likely not break the fast. I'm a fan of lemon water in the morning. I go through periods where I do it and where I don't do it, but I think, you know, I would say if you're below 3 grams of sugar, and that might be half a lemon, it might be less, you're not breaking the fast. Now, okay. One way to know for sure, and I'm a fan of the Keto Mojo, it's really an inexpensive device, Keto Mojo. It's a device that measures glucose and ketones with a finger stick, all in one. It's super effective, efficient in measuring both. Because the other question I get, does coffee break your fast? And for some people it does. And I was at a fasting conference, and so there were a couple hundred people there. We did a impromptu study where 50 people drank coffee and 50 didn't. And some people, coffee broke their fast. And how did we know? Well, their glucose levels went up and their ketone levels went down. So everybody is a little bit different. So the answer is not that simple, but the blanket answer would be if you're low in glucose, and I don't know how much is in a lemon, I would keep it like below 3 to 5 grams.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah. Same with coffee. I do drink coffee in the morning. I don't put anything in it. Last time I checked using the Keto Mojo, it did not break my fast, but it's something that should be measured, you know, kind of periodically so that you know.
Do you take any vitamins, brother?
I do. I have the MTHFR gene, so I do take a good B complex. I do take turmeric. I do take fish oil. I do take vitamin D. Not all the time on the D. I do take magnesium at night. I think everyone's deficient in magnesium, and I do take vitamin C. So
yeah, got it. Me too.
That's about it. I really do try to eat very healthy and whole food, plant-based type stuff, so that I don't really require a ton of vitamins. Vitamins, if you eat like crap, they're not going to overcome a bad diet.
You know, I love what you shared. I asked the guy that runs Omega Institute. He's really majorly into longevity, and I try to corner him. I said, what's the one thing that to increase lifespan? And he said, don't eat after, you know, just what you're saying. It's like, don't have the breakfast be a breaking of the fast.
Exactly. So we didn't cover that. Breaking the fast. That's what breakfast means. And so I break the fast. The best way to break the fast is not with sugary crap at all. You want to ease back into getting your insulin levels and glucose levels back in. You don't want to eat like tricks or cereal. So what do I eat for breakfast? Sometimes I'll break the fast with pumpkin seeds or nuts. Sometimes I'll break the fast with beans and eggs and arugula. I call that my breakfast salad. But I never eat, like, I don't do a ton of dairy. I don't do yogurts.
You don't do oatmeal in the morning either, do you?
That's a great question. Occasionally in the winter time around here, I will do oatmeal with berries. So again, I'm not that opposed to oatmeal at all. It's a whole food plant-based diet. So again, you're not going to be doing that for 15 hours of the day. So if you're doing it for 8 hours and you start out with a good steel-cut oatmeal, I don't think that spikes glucose and insulin quite like we think, and it's worth experimenting with.
So it sounds like you really like Grieger's research.
It's compelling. I'm not a vegan. I don't preach vegan. I have moved from obviously a poor diet when I was 50 pounds overweight to really an 80 or 90% vegetarian vegan type diet. And knowing these nutrient sensing pathways are triggered by animal protein and sugar, that's where the longevity part comes. If you look at the blue zones, if you look at the fasting research, if you look at the caloric restriction research, it's all, and even this fasting conference I went to, they brought up the fact that they feed these monkeys during a limited window. So they're not sure now if it's the limited window that is effective or the caloric restriction. Nonetheless, these animals live a lot longer and a lot healthier.
I just don't know whether I'm deficient with Grieger. I've been doing it since October, and I'm starting to think maybe I should eat eggs.
So that's a good point. Some people stall out in their progress, and diet variation, I think, is important. Diet variation. And you got to listen to your body, Stephen. If you think that, then you might be. And I've been doing this a long time, and I think we can get too narrow focused and forget that, if you think about our ancestors, they did not put themselves in positions of restricting everything like we do now. And so I think balance is important, with the exception of a ton of animal protein, because again, we don't even have to go back to paleo. I mean, if your aunts and uncles are still alive, ask them what they ate. No one was eating 10 chicken breasts a day, or even one. My aunts and uncles in their 90s didn't eat like that. It wasn't around. So I think it's more controlling the consumption, the volume, the hours, and the animal protein for longevity. And maybe that's why Grieger is so accurate, and why vegetarians and vegans are healthier, because they're not getting all that animal protein stimulating that mTOR pathway that turns on all the bad things that happen to us as we age.
Thank you, buddy.
Glad to. Patty, any other questions?
No, I don't think so. I think you've been very thorough, and I really appreciate that you took the time to do this today.
Yes, glad to. Again, anybody want to get on a call with me, I'm going to leave that last screen up here for a second. That's my calendar. I'd love to talk to you more and help you get dialed in. Check out that Zero app. If you want to spend the $100 on the Keto Mojo, that really gives you a lot of reliable info as to what you're doing to your body. If you're not used to fasting, start with 12-12 and increase accordingly. Stephen, all I can encourage is, if you're going to go to the desert and you're going to do a 4-day, just make sure you're drinking plenty of water. And here's a little nuance to water fasting is you're going to need salt. You're going to pee out all the sodium. So I'm a fan of, and this is one of the things I recommend to people when they're fasting, is to eat salt. Eat salt. You can eat like a half a teaspoon of salt when you're fasting. And what I mean by it is, like, and I'm talking about Himalayan good salt.
Yeah, Grieger doesn't think so, but you do.
I know Grieger doesn't think so. And, again, everybody needs something different. We will die without salt. And most people get too much salt. But when you're fasting, you're going to really deplete your salt. And you're going to feel weak, and cold, and your hands are going to feel skinny because you have no fluid in your body. It's just going straight through. So
I'm probably not going to do it out at the desert. I'm just going to probably go to the 12-hour fast.
start there for a while. But when people are doing long-term fasting, yeah, when you eat a little bit of salt, it's amazing. The hunger goes away and you feel a lot better. So
Zero app.
zero app.
Thanks, buddy.
All right, I'm gonna end this now. Really appreciate it. Hope I get a chance to talk to you again. Thanks so much for taking your Saturday and doing this with me. Feel free to email me or hit me up with any questions, and wish you all the best.
All right.